You know what she is? A trophy wife who got rusty. The word sliced through the crowded restaurant like a blade through silk, and for one horrifying moment, the entire room seemed to freeze around me. My husband Gregory stood at the center of Aurum, his brand new luxury restaurant in Denver, surrounded by investors in expensive suits and women dripping in diamonds. His champagne glass was raised high, and the smile on his face suggested he had just delivered the most clever joke of the evening. The laughter that followed was uncomfortable and uncertain, the kind of laughter that happens when people are not sure whether they should be amused or horrified by what they just heard. I stood 3 feet away from him, wearing the emerald dress he had selected for me that morning, my hair styled exactly the way he preferred, my smile carefully arranged on my face like a piece of expensive decoration. My name is Joanna, and I am 29 years old. Until that moment, standing in the middle of the grand opening celebration for the restaurant I had funded, I believed my marriage was built on love and partnership. I believed that the 13-year age gap between Gregory and me was nothing more than a number, that his experience and my youth complemented each other in ways that made us stronger together. I believed a lot of things that shattered like fine crystal on marble the moment my husband opened his mouth. He turned to me then, still basking in the attention of the room, and reached into his jacket pocket. What he pulled out was not a gift, not a gesture of appreciation for the woman who had invested nearly everything into making his dream come true. It was an envelope, thick and white, and unmistakable in its purpose. "Since we are making announcements tonight," Gregory said, his voice carrying the practiced smoothness of a man who had rehearsed this moment, "I figured I would get this out of the way too. Joanna, sweetheart, I am filing for divorce. My lawyer drew up the papers last week. You understand, right? A man in my position needs someone who can keep up with the image." The room went silent. Not the comfortable silence of shock, but the eager silence of spectators who knew they were witnessing something they would gossip about for months. I could feel their eyes on me, watching to see if I would cry, scream, or beg. They wanted a scene. They wanted drama to accompany their expensive appetizers and imported wine. I gave them nothing. My hand reached out and took the envelope from Gregory's fingers. My face remained composed, my breathing steady, my posture as elegant as the dress I wore. Years of learning to navigate his world had taught me how to mask my emotions, how to smile when I was breaking, how to appear calm when storms raged inside me. "Thank you for letting me know," I said, my voice so even that it surprised even me. "I appreciate the clarity." Gregory's smile flickered. He had expected tears. He had expected pleading. He had expected me to fall apart in front of his investors so he could play the role of the patient husband dealing with an emotional wife. Instead, I denied him the satisfaction. I turned and walked toward the exit, my heels clicking against the polished floor with each step. Behind me, I could hear Gregory attempting to restart the evening's festivities, his voice a little too loud, a little too forced. He was trying to recover from a scene that had not gone according to his script. The valet brought my car around, and I drove home in silence, the divorce papers sitting unopened on the passenger seat beside me. The Denver skyline glittered in my rearview mirror, beautiful and cold, and indifferent to the destruction that had just occurred. I had entered that restaurant as a wife, as a partner, as a believer in a future that included Gregory at its center. I left as something else entirely. When I pulled into the driveway of our house, the house I had helped purchase with my own inheritance, I sat in the car for nearly 20 minutes without moving. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped bands around my ribs and was slowly pulling them tighter. But I did not cry. Not yet. There would be time for tears later, in private, where no one could use them against me. What I kept coming back to, over and over, was the word rusty. He had called me rusty, like I was a tool that had lost its usefulness, a decorative piece that had tarnished with age. I was 29 years old, and my husband had already decided I was past my expiration date. The cruel irony was that everything around him, the restaurant, the investors, the opportunity he was celebrating that night, existed because of me. My money, my connections, my willingness to believe in a man who saw me as nothing more than a shiny object to display when convenient and discard when dull. That realization would change everything. But first, I had to understand how I had ended up here, standing in the ruins of a life I thought I had built on love. I met Gregory 4 years earlier, when I was 25 and he was 38. At the time, I was working as a financial analyst at a private equity firm, having graduated near the top of my class and already making a name for myself in an industry dominated by men twice my age. I was not naive or inexperienced. I was ambitious, intelligent, and financially independent in ways that most women my age could only dream of. My grandmother had passed away when I was 23, leaving me an inheritance that most people would consider life-changing. She had built a small empire through decades of smart investments and careful planning, and when she died, she left everything to me, her only grandchild, the girl she had raised after my parents died in a car accident when I was 7. That inheritance totaled just over $3 million, and I had spent 2 years learning how to manage it wisely before I ever met the man who would become my husband. Gregory owned a small bistro in downtown Denver when we first crossed paths. I had stopped in for lunch during a particularly brutal workday, seeking a quiet corner where I could review documents and eat something that was not vending machine coffee. He noticed me immediately, or so he would later claim, drawn to the woman sitting alone with spreadsheets and a determination that he found intoxicating. He was charming in a way that felt genuine. He asked about my work, listened with what appeared to be real interest, and made me laugh for the first time in weeks. When he asked for my number at the end of that lunch, I gave it to him without hesitation. Looking back, I wonder if that was the first mistake, or if the mistakes came later, piled one on top of another until I could no longer see the foundation crumbling beneath them. Our courtship was intense and romantic. Gregory knew how to make a woman feel special, how to plan dates that seemed spontaneous, but were carefully orchestrated to sweep me off my feet. He sent flowers to my office. He remembered every detail I mentioned about my life, and brought them up weeks later, proving he had been paying attention. He introduced me to his world of food and hospitality with the enthusiasm of a man who genuinely loved his craft. 6 months after we met, he proposed. Looking back, I know that was too fast. I know I should have waited, should have given myself more time to see beyond the romantic gestures and into the man beneath them. But I was in love, truly and deeply in love, with someone who made me feel seen and valued in ways I had not experienced since my grandmother's death. I said yes, without hesitation. We married in a small ceremony attended by close friends and Gregory's business associates. I wore a simple white dress that my grandmother would have loved. Gregory wore a suit that cost more than my first car. We honeymooned in Italy, where he talked endlessly about his dreams of opening a luxury restaurant that would put Denver on the culinary map. That dream required money, significant money, the kind of money that a small bistro owner did not have access to, but his new wife did. Gregory never asked directly, not at first. He simply shared his vision with me, painted pictures of what could be, and waited for me to offer. When I did, he seemed genuinely surprised and grateful. He promised that my investment would be repaid tenfold, that we were partners in this venture, that everything he built would belong to both of us. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. My grandmother had taught me to be careful with money, but she had also taught me to invest in people I trusted. I trusted Gregory completely, and so I transferred $2.7 million into the business account that would eventually become Aurum. For 3 years, I watched my money transform into something beautiful. I attended meetings with contractors and designers. I reviewed financial projections and offered suggestions based on my background and analysis. I stood beside Gregory at every milestone, celebrated every small victory, and absorbed every setback as something we would overcome together. I was not just a silent investor. I was an active participant in building something that I believed would be our shared legacy. What I did not notice, or perhaps what I chose not to see, was the way Gregory's attitude toward me shifted as Orem grew closer to completion. The more successful the project became, the less he seemed to need my input. Meetings I had always attended suddenly happened without my knowledge. Decisions I had always been consulted on were made without my awareness. When I asked questions, Gregory would smile and tell me not to worry, that he was handling everything, that I should focus on looking beautiful for the grand opening. Looking beautiful. That phrase should have been a warning sign. It should have told me that the man I married saw me differently than I saw myself. But I was so invested, emotionally and financially, that I could not bring myself to examine what was happening too closely. I made excuses for his distance. I rationalized his behavior as stress-related. I told myself that once the restaurant opened, everything would return to normal. Instead, everything fell apart. The night of the grand opening, I arrived at Orem feeling nervous, but excited. 3 years of work were finally coming to fruition, and I was ready to celebrate alongside the man I loved. Gregory had been distant in the days leading up to the event, but I attributed that to the pressure of launching a major business. I had no idea that he had spent those days consulting with lawyers, preparing divorce papers, and planning the most humiliating moment of my life. Standing in our driveway now, still processing the destruction of everything I thought I knew, I finally began to understand the scope of my miscalculation. I had trusted Gregory with my heart and my money, believing that both were safe in his hands. He had taken everything I offered and decided I was no longer worth keeping. But here is what Gregory did not understand about me, what he never bothered to learn during our 4 years together. I was not just a trophy wife. I was not just a source of funding. I was the granddaughter of a woman who had survived hardships that would have broken most people, built a fortune from nothing, and taught me that money was power only when you knew how to use it. Gregory thought he could humiliate me and walk away with everything. He thought I would sign his papers and disappear quietly, too broken to fight back. He thought the woman he married was weak, dependent, and easily discarded. He was about to discover how wrong he was. I walked into the house and went straight to my office, the room Gregory rarely entered, because financial documents bored him. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and began reviewing every agreement, contract, and transaction related to Orem. My hands were shaking, but my mind was sharp, focused in a way it had not been in years. The documents confirmed what I already suspected. My $2.7 million investment was structured as a loan to the business, not a gift. The terms were clear, drafted by lawyers I had hired to protect my interests, even when I trusted Gregory completely. The loan could be called due at any time, with 30 days' notice, and failure to repay would result in immediate seizure of business assets. Gregory had never read those documents carefully. He had signed them because I asked him to, secure in his belief that I would never use them against him. He assumed my love would protect him from the consequences of the agreement he entered. But love had not protected me tonight. Love had not stopped him from humiliating me in front of strangers. Love had not prevented him from discarding me like a worn-out accessory. If love could not save our marriage, then perhaps the absence of love could save me. I picked up my phone and called my attorney. It was nearly 11 at night, but she answered on the second ring, already aware that something was wrong from the tone of my voice when I spoke her name. "Veronica," I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. "I need you to initiate the loan recall on the Orem investment. All $2.7 million. Tonight." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Veronica had handled my grandmother's estate, and now handled mine. She knew my financial situation better than anyone except me. She also knew what this call meant. "Joanna, are you certain? Once we start this process, there is no going back. The business will collapse without that funding. You will be destroying everything Gregory has built. I thought about the word Rusty. I thought about the envelope of divorce papers sitting on my passenger seat. I thought about the laughter that followed my husband's cruel joke, the laughter of people who saw me as nothing more than a punchline. I am certain, I said. Send the notice tonight. I want it in his hands by morning. When I ended the call, I sat alone in the darkness of my office, surrounded by the evidence of a life I had carefully constructed and a marriage I had desperately wanted to believe in. The tears I had been holding back finally came, silent and hot, streaming down my cheeks as I mourned not just the end of my marriage, but the death of the woman who had trusted so blindly. But even as I cried, a new feeling was growing inside me. It was not anger, though anger was there. It was not sadness, though sadness threatened to overwhelm me. It was something quieter and more powerful, something that felt like waking up after a long and troubled sleep. It was clarity. For years, I had defined myself in relation to Gregory, his wife, his partner, his supporter. I had poured my resources and my energy into his dreams, believing that his success was our success, that his happiness was my happiness. I had forgotten that I existed before him, that I was someone before I became his accessory. Tonight, that changed. Tonight, I began the process of remembering who I was and discovering who I could become. The woman Gregory had dismissed as Rusty was about to prove that she was made of steel. I did not sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my office and made plans, methodical and thorough, the way my grandmother had taught me. I reviewed every asset, every account, every legal document related to my marriage and my investments. I identified what was mine, what was his, and what would be contested. By the time the sun rose over Denver, painting the mountains in shades of gold and pink, I had a complete picture of my financial situation. It was better than Gregory realized. The house we lived in was in my name alone, purchased before our marriage with funds from my inheritance. The cars were in my name. The investment accounts I had maintained separately were substantial and untouched. Gregory had assumed that marriage meant what was mine became his. He had never bothered to check whether that assumption was legally accurate. He had never asked about the prenuptial agreement his lawyer had briefly mentioned and then forgotten. The agreement I had quietly insisted on signing before our wedding. He had never realized that the woman he called Rusty had been protecting herself all along, even when she did not know she needed protection. The morning brought consequences. At exactly 8 a.m, Veronica sent the formal loan recall notice to Orem's registered business address. Gregory would receive it within hours, and when he did, his world would begin to crumble. I showered, dressed in clothes that were comfortable rather than decorative, and made myself a cup of coffee. I sat on the back patio and watched the city wake up, feeling strangely peaceful despite the chaos that was about to unfold. Whatever happened next, I had made a choice. I had acted rather than reacted. I had taken control of my own story. My phone rang at 9:15 in the morning. Gregory's name flashed on the screen, and I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 9:17, then 9:19, then 9:22. By 10 in the morning, I had received 8 calls from my husband, each more frantic than the last based on the voicemails he left. Something told me this was only the beginning. The first voicemail was confused. "Joanna, I just received something from your lawyer. Call me back immediately. This has to be a mistake." The second voicemail was irritated. "I do not know what game you are playing, but this is not funny. Call me." The third voicemail was angry. "You think you can do this to me? After everything I have done for you? Call me right now." By the 7th voicemail, the anger had given way to something else entirely. "Joanna, please. We need to talk about this. I did not mean what I said last night. I was nervous and I said something stupid. Please just call me back. We can work this out." I listened to each message once, then deleted them without responding. Gregory had spent 4 years believing he understood me, and in all that time, he had never bothered to look beyond the surface. He saw a young wife with money and assumed that meant she was naive, controllable, disposable. He never considered that the woman who managed a multi-million-dollar portfolio might also know how to protect it. That miscalculation was about to cost him everything. The decision to withdraw my investment was not made in anger, though anger certainly fueled it. It was made from a place of cold, calculated clarity. I had reviewed the documents. I understood the consequences. I knew that pulling $2.7 million from a restaurant that had just opened its doors would be devastating, not just financially, but reputationally. Investors would panic. Vendors would demand immediate payment. The carefully constructed empire Gregory had built on my foundation would collapse like a house of cards in a windstorm. Part of me felt guilty about that. The staff at Aurum had done nothing wrong. The sous chefs and servers and hostesses who had worked so hard to make the grand opening a success did not deserve to lose their jobs because my husband was a cruel and calculating man. But I also knew that Gregory had other options. He could sell assets, take out loans, find new investors. He was a charming man when he wanted to be. Surely he could charm his way into more money the same way he had charmed his way into mine. What I refused to do was continue funding the dreams of a man who had publicly humiliated me and handed me divorce papers at what was supposed to be our celebration. What I refused to do was pretend that his cruelty had no consequences. I spent the morning organizing my thoughts and my documents. I called my therapist and scheduled an emergency appointment for the following day. I called my best friend Fiona, who was traveling for work in California, and left a message explaining what had happened. I called the locksmith and arranged to have the locks changed on the house that was legally mine. Each phone call was a brick in the foundation of my new life, a life that did not include Gregory or his dreams or his cruelty. Each decision I made was a step away from the woman who had stood silently while her husband mocked her, and toward the woman I was determined to become. By early afternoon, the calls from Gregory had become relentless. My phone showed 18 missed calls, each one more desperate than the last. I finally listened to the most recent voicemail, curious to see how far his panic had progressed. "Joanna, I am begging you. The investors are calling. They are asking about the funding situation. They are talking about pulling out. You are going to destroy everything we built together. Is that what you want? Is that really what you want? Everything we built together." The phrase made me laugh, though there was no humor in it. We had not built anything together. I had funded his dream while he took all the credit. I had supported his vision while he dismissed my contributions. I had loved him completely while he viewed me as nothing more than a means to an end. The investors started pulling out that same afternoon. Word travels fast in the business community, especially when that word involves financial instability and unexpected funding withdrawals. Gregory had positioned Aurum as a sure thing, a luxury dining experience backed by solid capital and guaranteed success. Now that guarantee was gone, and the people who had trusted him with their money were scrambling to protect themselves. I learned all of this through Veronica, who monitored the situation with the detached professionalism I had always admired in her. She reported that Gregory was desperately seeking alternative funding, calling in favors, even attempting to secure loans from less reputable sources. Nothing was working. The culinary world was small, and word had spread quickly that Aurum was in trouble before it even truly began. By evening, my phone showed 34 missed calls from Gregory. I had not answered a single one. The calls continued throughout the night, each one a testament to Gregory's growing desperation. I slept better than I had in months, the weight of my decision somehow lighter than the weight of my doubt had been. When I woke the next morning, my phone showed 42 missed calls from my soon-to-be ex-husband. 42 attempts to reach me, to explain, to manipulate, to control. 42 reminders that the man I had married was not the man I thought he was. I turned off the phone and made myself breakfast, something I had not done in years. Gregory always preferred to eat out or order in, claiming that his refined palate made home cooking seem pedestrian. I had gone along with this preference, as I had gone along with so many of his preferences, slowly erasing my own desires in favor of his. That morning, I made scrambled eggs and toast, simple and satisfying, and I ate them at the kitchen table while watching the sun climb higher over the mountains. It was a small act of rebellion, but it felt significant. I was remembering what I liked, what I wanted, who I was before I became Gregory's wife. Fiona called me back around 10 in the morning. She had received my message and immediately booked a flight home, cutting her business trip short to be with me. "Joanna, I cannot believe he did that to you," she said, her voice thick with anger on my behalf. "In front of all those people? What kind of monster does something like that?" "The kind of monster I married, apparently. What do you need? What can I do? I will be there by this evening. Just come. I need someone to remind me that I am not crazy for doing this." "You are not crazy. You are the sanest person I know, and you are going to be okay. Better than okay. You are going to thrive." Fiona's words meant more to me than she would ever know. For 4 years, I had existed in Gregory's orbit, seeing myself through his eyes, measuring my worth by his standards. Having someone who knew me before, someone who remembered the woman I used to be, was like finding a compass when you have been lost in the woods. The days that followed were a blur of activity and emotion. True to her word, Veronica pushed the loan recall through with ruthless efficiency. Gregory had 30 days to repay the $2.7 million or face legal action and asset seizure. Given that most of that money had already been spent on construction, staffing, and the elaborate grand opening party, repayment was impossible without significant outside help. The investors who had celebrated at Orem just days earlier began demanding explanations. Some of them had contributed their own funds based on Gregory's assurances that the restaurant was fully capitalized and financially stable. Learning that the primary investor had withdrawn her support sent shockwaves through the carefully constructed facade he had built. On day 3, Gregory stopped calling and started showing up. He appeared at the house, pounding on the door and demanding that I let him in. I watched from an upstairs window as he grew increasingly agitated, his expensive suit rumpled, his hair disheveled, his face red with frustration. Eventually he gave up and drove away, only to return an hour later with flowers and what I assumed was supposed to be an apology. I did not open the door either time. Instead, I called the police and reported that my estranged husband was harassing me. When the officers arrived, they found Gregory still standing on the porch, clutching his wilting bouquet and trying to explain that this was all a misunderstanding. They escorted him to his car and warned him not to return without an invitation. He returned anyway, of course. 5 more times over the following week, each visit more pathetic than the last. I documented everything, building a record of his behavior that Veronica assured me would be useful when the divorce proceedings began. The insult was not just about me, I realized as I watched him from behind curtained windows. It was about how little he believed I would ever stand up for myself. He had called me Rusty in front of his investors because he genuinely thought I would accept it, would smile and nod, and continue playing my role as the beautiful wife who funded his dreams without complaint. He had never imagined that I might have limits. He had never considered that there might be a line he could cross that would unleash consequences he could not control. He had underestimated me in every possible way, and now he was paying the price. The financial fallout continued to accelerate as the days passed. I learned through Veronica that 2 of the major investors had filed lawsuits against Gregory, claiming he had misrepresented the restaurant's financial stability when soliciting their contributions. A vendor who had provided expensive kitchen equipment was demanding immediate payment for invoices that Gregory had promised to settle after the grand opening. The landlord of the building where Orem was located was threatening eviction due to missed rent payments. All of this had happened within 2 weeks of the grand opening. All of this had happened because Gregory had assumed that my money would always be there, that my support was unconditional, that my love made me incapable of protecting myself. I met with Veronica in her office on day 14, reviewing the status of the loan recall and the divorce proceedings. She had been my grandmother's attorney for 20 years, and she had seen every possible variation of financial and romantic entanglement. Nothing surprised her anymore, but I could tell that Gregory's behavior had come close. "The loan recall is proceeding as expected," she said, sliding documents across her desk. "Gregory has made no attempt to repay any portion of the amount owed. His lawyers have requested extensions, claiming hardship, but the terms of the agreement are clear. He signed them. He is bound by them. And the divorce? His initial filing was laughably unfair. He wanted you to walk away with essentially nothing while he retained full ownership of the business you funded. I responded with a counterfiling that reflects the actual financial reality of your marriage. He is not happy about it." I smiled grimly. "I imagine he is not. Joanna, I have to ask. Are you certain you want to proceed this way? Pulling the investment, fighting the divorce, all of it? There are easier paths, quieter paths. Some women prefer to take a settlement and move on." I thought about the question carefully before answering. Veronica deserved an honest response, not the kind of polished deflection I had learned to offer during my years with Gregory. "He called me Rusty in front of 50 people, I said finally. He handed me divorce papers at what was supposed to be our celebration. He spent 4 years using my money and my love while planning to discard me the moment it was convenient. I am not interested in quiet. I am interested in making sure he understands exactly what he lost." Veronica nodded slowly, something like respect in her eyes. "Then we proceed as planned. The hearing is scheduled for next month. I suggest you prepare yourself for more unpleasant surprises. Men like Gregory do not go quietly." She was right about that. Over the following weeks, Gregory's attempts to contact me became increasingly creative and increasingly desperate. He sent mutual friends to plead his case. He had his mother call me, sobbing about how I was destroying her son's life. He even attempted to have flowers delivered to my office at the firm where I still worked, flowers that were intercepted and returned before they ever reached my desk. But through it all, I felt something I had not expected. I felt the final emotional tie snap, replaced by a calm certainty that this was no longer about revenge, but self-respect. Revenge would have meant wanting to hurt Gregory the way he had hurt me. Self-respect meant understanding that I deserved better than what he had offered, that I was worth more than the sum of my investments, that my value as a person had nothing to do with his opinion of me. I had spent 4 years molding myself into the wife Gregory wanted, the beautiful accessory who funded his dreams and asked for nothing in return. I had lost myself in his vision, his priorities, his definition of success. Now, finally, I was finding my way back to the woman my grandmother had raised, the woman who knew her worth and refused to accept anything less. The divorce papers Gregory had given me remained unsigned on my desk. Instead, I had my own papers drawn up, papers that outlined the true financial picture of our marriage, the assets I had brought in, the investments I had made, the protection I had maintained, papers that would expose every assumption Gregory had made about the balance of power between us. But before I filed those papers, before I officially ended the marriage that Gregory had already destroyed, there was one more conversation I needed to have. Not for closure, not for reconciliation, but for myself. I needed to see his face when he finally understood what he had lost. I sent Gregory a text message, the first direct communication I had initiated since the night of the grand opening. It contained only 5 words. "Come to the house tonight." His response came within seconds. "I will be there at 7. I put down my phone and smiled. The stage was set. Now it was time for the final act. Gregory arrived at exactly 7 in the evening, his car pulling into the driveway with the desperate urgency of a man who believed he still had something to save. I watched from the living room window as he climbed out, pausing to check his reflection in the car mirror and straighten his tie. Even now, even after everything that had happened, He was concerned about his appearance. He looked terrible despite his efforts. His suit was wrinkled in ways that suggested he had been sleeping in it. His face carried the weight of sleepless nights and mounting desperation. This was not the confident, charming man who had swept me off my feet 4 years ago. This was someone who had bet everything on a woman staying weak and was now paying the price for that miscalculation. I opened the door before he could knock. "Joanna," he said, his voice cracking with relief and something that might have been hope. "Thank you for finally talking to me. Please, can we just go inside and discuss this like adults?" I stepped aside and let him enter, not because he deserved the courtesy, but because I wanted to have this conversation in the home he thought he would take from me. I wanted him to see the art on the walls that I had purchased, the furniture I had chosen, the life I had built that existed entirely separate from him. We sat in the living room, him on the couch where he used to lounge with such casual ownership, me in the chair my grandmother had given me when I graduated from college. The distance between us was only a few feet, but it felt like miles. "I know I messed up," Gregory began, launching into what was clearly a rehearsed speech. "What I said at the opening, it was stupid and cruel. I was under so much pressure, and I lashed out at the wrong person. I did not mean any of it, Joanna. You have to believe me." I listened without interrupting, watching his hands gesture nervously, his face contort with manufactured emotion, his eyes dart around the room looking for something to use as leverage. He was still trying to manipulate me, still believing that the right combination of words would unlock my compliance. "The divorce papers were a mistake," he continued. "I should never have done that in public. I should have talked to you first, explained what I was thinking. We could have worked something out, figured out a way to separate that did not destroy everything we built together." "Everything we built together," I repeated, speaking for the first time since he entered. That is an interesting way to describe a restaurant funded entirely by my money. Gregory's expression flickered, a crack in the facade. "Your money was an investment. In us. In our future. I never took it for granted. You called me a rusty trophy wife in front of 50 people and handed me divorce papers. That seems like taking something for granted." He stood up, pacing the room with the restless energy of a man who was not used to being on the defensive. "I said I am sorry. What else do you want from me? I will do anything to fix this. Just tell me what you need," what I needed. The question hung in the air between us, loaded with assumptions about what my answer would be. Gregory expected me to name my price, to negotiate, to give him an opening he could exploit. He expected the conversation to end with a compromise that left him in control. Instead, I stood up and walked to my desk. I picked up the divorce papers I had prepared, the ones that reflected reality rather than his wishful thinking, and handed them to him. "What I need," I said, "is for you to sign these." Gregory looked at the papers, his face draining of color as he read the terms. "This is insane. You cannot expect me to agree to this. You are asking for everything." "I am asking for what is mine. The house I purchased before we married. The investments I made with my own money. The assets I brought into this marriage that you never contributed to. Everything else, including the restaurant you cannot afford to run, is yours to keep or lose. The restaurant will fail without that funding. You know that. You are destroying my life's work out of spite." I thought about that accusation for a moment, turning it over in my mind the way I had turned over his cruelty for weeks. "You destroyed your life's work the moment you decided I was disposable. I am simply removing myself from the wreckage." Gregory's desperation turned to anger, his face reddening, his hands clenching into fists. For a moment, I felt a flicker of something that might have been fear, an awareness that I was alone in a house with a man who had nothing left to lose. But I held my ground, refusing to show weakness, refusing to give him the reaction he was looking for. "You will regret this," he said, his voice low and threatening. "I will make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. A cold, calculating woman who destroyed her husband because he made one mistake. One mistake, I repeated slowly. Is that what you are calling years of dismissing my contributions? Ignoring my input? Treating me like decoration rather than a partner? Is that what you call handing me divorce papers in public and telling your investors I was rusty? He had no answer for that. The anger drained from his face, replaced by something that might have been shame if he were capable of feeling it. More likely, it was just the realization that his threats had no power over me. Sign the papers, Gregory. Walk away with whatever dignity you have left. Or fight me in court and watch everything you have built become public record, including every financial decision you made with my money, every conversation we had about the business, every promise you broke. He stared at me for a long moment, searching for the woman he thought he had married, the woman who would have forgiven anything, accepted any excuse, allowed any mistreatment. That woman did not exist anymore, if she ever had. You really are cold, he said finally, his voice bitter. I never saw it before, but you really are. No, I replied calmly. I am just no longer willing to be warm towards someone who treated me like an object to be used and discarded. There is a difference. I watched him struggle with the decision, watched him calculate his odds of winning a legal battle against a woman with superior resources and a documented trail of his failures. I watched him realize, perhaps for the first time, that he had profoundly misjudged the woman he married. Finally, without another word, he signed the papers. His hand shook as he wrote his name, the signature messy and uneven, the mark of a man whose confidence had been completely shattered. When he finished, he dropped the pen on the table and walked toward the door. I hope you know what you are giving up, he said, pausing with his hand on the doorknob. I know exactly what I am giving up, I replied, and I know exactly what I am gaining. He left without looking back, his car peeling out of the driveway with the same desperate urgency it had arrived with. I stood at the window and watched until his taillights disappeared around the corner. Then I sat down on my grandmother's chair and let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. It was over. Finally, completely over. The weeks that followed were busy with legal proceedings and the slow process of rebuilding a life that no longer included Gregory. The divorce was finalized quickly, both of us eager to end the connection, though for very different reasons. I got the house, my investments, and my freedom. He got the restaurant and the mountain of debt that came with it. Aurum closed its doors 3 months after the grand opening, unable to survive the loss of funding and the exodus of investors who no longer trusted the management. Gregory tried to save it, taking on debt, selling assets, even attempting to launch a crowdfunding campaign that raised barely a fraction of what he needed. In the end, the restaurant that was supposed to make him a culinary legend became just another failed venture in a city full of them. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Gregory eventually moved to another state, hoping to start over somewhere his reputation had not preceded him. The investors who lost money at Aurum were not inclined to let him forget what happened, and several had filed lawsuits that would follow him for years. The charming, confident man who had convinced me to fund his dreams was now just another cautionary tale about the dangers of arrogance and entitlement. As for me, I took the money I recovered and invested it more carefully this time, in businesses run by people I trusted, in ventures that aligned with my values, in opportunities that would grow without requiring me to shrink. I bought a smaller home in a quieter neighborhood, one that felt like mine, rather than a showpiece for someone else's ambitions. I surrounded myself with friends who saw me as a person rather than a resource. Fiona became my constant companion during those first few months, checking in regularly, dragging me to dinners and movies and weekend hikes in the mountains. She introduced me to her book club, a group of women who met weekly to discuss literature and life and everything in between. I started volunteering at a mentorship program for young women entering the financial industry, sharing what I had learned about protecting yourself while pursuing your dreams. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into one of the investors from the Aurum opening at a coffee shop downtown. She recognized me immediately and pulled me aside, her expression curious rather than hostile. "I have to ask," she said. "Did you know? That night, when he said those things, did you already have a plan?" I thought about the question carefully before answering. I did not have a plan. I had clarity. For the first time in 4 years, I saw my husband for exactly who he was. And once I saw that, the rest was just details. She nodded slowly, something like respect in her eyes. "For what it is worth, I think you did the right thing. Gregory fooled a lot of us, but you were the one who held him accountable." I thanked her and walked away, not because I needed her approval, but because the conversation had given me something unexpected. Validation. Not from her words, but from my own certainty that I had navigated an impossible situation with grace and strength. Gregory's downfall continued to unfold in the months and years that followed. The lawsuits mounted as investor after investor sought to recover their losses. His credit was destroyed, his reputation in the restaurant industry permanently tarnished by stories of mismanagement and betrayal. He lost his apartment, then his car, and eventually had to move in with a distant cousin who was willing to house him while he figured out his next move. The last I heard, he was working as a line cook at a chain restaurant in another city, a far cry from the culinary empire he had once envisioned. The man who had called me Rusty was now the one corroding, eaten away by the consequences of his own choices, his arrogance replaced by the humiliation of starting over with nothing. As I sit here now, 2 years removed from that terrible night at Orem, I find myself thinking not about revenge, but about transformation. I could have stayed silent. I could have signed Gregory's papers and walked away with nothing, too broken to fight for what was mine. I could have accepted his definition of my worth and let it become my truth. Instead, I chose differently. I chose to remember that I existed before him, that my value was never determined by his opinion, that my strength had been there all along, waiting for the moment I would finally need it. Looking back on everything that happened, I do not regret a single choice I made, because the revenge was never really the point. The real victory was discovering that I never needed anyone else to see my worth for it to be real.